It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. We're here with Chad Jutner, Super Chad.
Hi.
Say hello. And the voice of reason, Peter Lawrence. Encyclopedia Dan Shui is with us as well. He just can spit out facts and stuff with, so much skill. Definitely. I think we're going to talk about diminishing returns and throwing good money after bad and going down rabbit holes. You know, we run into problems a lot. You know, it's probably a more apt job description for us as problem solvers. And, I recently created an app and tested it, and it worked. And then because of a decision, it exploded, and there was changes and rework and some manual stuff I had to do to kind of keep it going. And in the end, it all worked out, but it took a long time to get there. And so the more I put into it, value kept dropping, the bang for the buck, the ROI. Another instance of trying to template email signatures, I went down a rabbit hole, and that didn't work out. So that's what I want to talk about. Those kind of situations. How do you fail fast? How do you avoid going too far down that rabbit hole and throwing good money after bad and putting lipstick on a pig and all those wonderful things?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times you tend to think about it in sort of developer terms, and if you have technical debt, that's somebody that's decided to let that go for now. And we'll get it later. And maybe you'll get it later, and maybe you don't until it becomes so obnoxious that you need to get rid of it.
So diminishing returns. So this is a phenomenon that occurs in like wide swaths of our everyday life, right? And I think there's some sort of, I think it's tied into entropy, but I won't get into this. So here's
it took him like 2 seconds to get to the word entropy.
Here, just to say, I'm not going to expound on that, but just so we can define terms here and talk about what do we mean by diminishing returns.
Right.
I'm going to use a practical example from my current life. I'm going to talk about guitars for a second. Kyle just let me borrow his last night. Very, very nice of him. So suppose I want to learn to play guitar. I could buy a $100 guitar. It's going to be probably a piece of garbage. And I'm probably going to get frustrated. I'm probably going to quit. And I'm never going to learn to play guitar. Or I could spend 5 times that. And I could get a pretty good guitar. And I might be able to learn guitar. And I might get really good. I might be really happy and have a great hobby for the rest of my life. So there's a big jump between a bad guitar and a pretty good guitar. But if you want a great guitar, you probably have to spend like $2,000 or $3,000 or more. And the difference between a pretty good guitar and a great guitar, nowhere near as big of a difference as there is between a bad guitar and a pretty good guitar. So I think it's that way with a lot of things. It's low-hanging fruit. You can get a lot of bang for your buck early on, but then it gets more and more expensive to make incremental progress.
What about like the $70,000 guitar or the $200,000 guitar?
Those are the ones that like David Gilmour owned or something. Like there's nothing better about the guitar. It's just because like the guy from Pink Floyd touched it once.
It's just more famous. It's just a more famous guitar.
Yeah.
Okay. I think guitars are a great jumping off point for that, because they are like, kind of like cars and everything. It is monetary diminishing returns is pretty easy to spot, right?
Ford Escort. Into this with hardware. Like, part of my job is making sure everybody's equipped to do their job. And how long do I, at what point do I keep fixing something? Batteries go bad. Like that seems to happen after 2.5, 3 years. They just go south. And is it worth it to just replace a battery? The time to do it and the time for the battery. And then it's an aftermarket battery in a lot of cases. And how long is it going to last after that? For it requires another battery. Or if the screen goes and it's a MacBook, that's what, $500 or something like that. I don't know. The price of another MacBook.
It's the price of a MacBook.
So, you deal with those, those points of decision that you have to make. And every one of them has a dollar sign attached to it or a time investment attached to it. If you don't fix it now, then you got to replace it. or then you're going to run into problems with it down the road. But if you fix it now and it's no good, like 6 months later, how do you know? It's a gamble with hardware.
Especially with, computer hardware, it's always a gamble to fix it versus cell phones.
Hey, Peter, as developers, I've experienced frequently the diminishing returns of adding more people to a project.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very hard thing to peg, to nail down, but we always use the example of make a baby in a month, right? Right. Adding people doesn't necessarily always increase velocity or improve timelines or people, and so I have yet to find the perfect sweet spot for, and it varies project to project, right? But size of the project, size of the team, and how you can. Go ahead.
Keep going.
I was just in my world, it's hard for me break problems down into workable units, and then spread that across a team of developers that is, X members big,
right?
In a way that doesn't cause collisions and conflicts and everything else.
That's a huge problem.
It's very difficult. Yeah.
Well, it's not only are people not Legos, you can just add more or widgets or whatever, but adding more people to a complicated software project actually reduces the productivity of the people that are already there because they have a responsibility to help the new people get up to speed and stuff. So it's kind of a double hit for a while.
Yeah, it's a really, it's a magic trick if you can pull it off correctly, right? Especially if you're behind schedule, a lot of times what you'll hear is, hey, let's just give you more people, right? That'll help.
We'll just have 10 experts. Oh, wait, we don't have any experts.
So the complexity level of the project and the complexity level of whatever problem domain you're in the middle of, adding people.
Just plain old onboarding, bringing someone into a company.
That's 3 days.
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
I had one issue with, we built an app and it was fine in tests with 5 people, but then when 100 people used it, it tanked and we needed a fix for it and we needed a front end developer. And we didn't have one. So I went to 2 other people, just hoping they would be able to figure it out. And each one I probably spent an hour and a half to 2 hours getting all set up and walking through it just to show them the problem and get them access to it so they could try to solve it. Then we had a new front-end developer start, and I spent the same time with him, and he fixed it in 5 minutes, moving a semicolon 3 lines down.
Yeah.
You need to put the render or the function in the render or the render in the function. I don't know.
It's a React app, I can already tell.
So, I was asked, I'm kind of buried with work. I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel. But at one point, someone said, do you want us to try to get an intern in here to help? No. Oh, God, no.
Well, yeah. And back to your talk, Chad, is the experience of the developer makes a huge difference too, right? Onboarding and up to speed are 2 different numbers. And once they're up to speed is not the same as a productive developer either. So you've got 3 tiers to get through, and then you have to take away from everybody else to get them built up to that point. And do you have enough runway to have that make any bit of difference to your finish line?
Yeah, and you bring to mind one of my pet peeves in the software world, the whole hit the ground running phrase. It's nobody lands on a big software project and hits the ground running.
We should have a whole episode around words they use to describe us that piss us off. Or phrases, right?
That would be fun.
I can't stand rock star. I'm man, if I was a rock star, I would have limos and private jets and all of these things that come with being a rock star. And I think some of it almost comes across as demeaning these days. But yeah, Peter, to your point, it's I forget how it's described, but cost, scope, and timeline are the 3. The iron triangle of constraints, right, within a project, right? And
absolutely.
I think people think if you throw more money at it, throwing more money probably usually means a lot of time more people.
Right.
It's not the constraint you think it is. It's actually, if we're talking about diminishing returns, you guys nailed it. The drain on the other everybody else's time to get that person up to speed. The idea that we are. I think the idea is sometimes that we are Legos, right? Hey, I'll just give this problem to this guy, right? If it was estimated at 3 story points, that's 3 story points for literally anybody, and that's not at all how it works. And diminishing returns plays into how we size stories and how we estimate timelines, because if you're trying to take a 3-year project down to a 2-year timeline, right? Like, maybe more people are probably going to help them, but you're not going to put 50 people on it, right? Like, say you had an unlimited budget, right?
Right.
I'm not going to ask for 50 developers or 25 or even 15. It's on us to break it down into digestible units of work that we can spread across a team. And I'm still not sure what that sweet spot looks like for big things.
Yeah, I think software is such a context-dependent endeavor, and what I mean by that is a Lego doesn't require any context to be useful. It has a function. Like, this is a brick in a wall. That's all it has to do, is bear a load. But with software, if you have 2 developers and one has a lot of context around how your microservices interact with your database and all this one, and the other doesn't have any of that context, that's night and day. You have to have that context enabled to safely modify a system of sufficient complexity and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And that context takes a lot of time to acquire.
That first thing you said there is brilliant. Right? Like a Lego piece exists in a context-free world. Is that how you said that?
That's that's a better way of saying it, how you just did it.
I think your way is pretty
I was an FTE on a project with a tight deadline, and it was a high stress situation where we just had to deliver. So I met with some management folks, and we had brought on 2 consultants to help out, and we're looking at it, and it's like, well, if they each work 60 hours a week for the next month, then we should be able to get there. And I said, gentlemen, this is a perfect example of it looks good on paper.
Yeah.
Has anybody talked to them to see if they can work 60 hours a week, or there's the diminishing turn on working 60 hours a week?
Exactly. Yeah. How many times have, I think it was Jeff Atwood or one of those guys who said, I was working this job where I was working 60 hours a week, and I found out that I'd go into work the next day and I'd spend the first half of the day undoing the stuff I did the last half of the previous day when I was too tired to be able to think clearly.
Yeah, there's a daily diminishing return also, right? Like, I think as software developers, you get to know yourself over time that, I am starting to not pay attention. I'm starting to not code to standards. I'm just trying to get something written down or typed in or whatever you want to call it, just to get it done. And it keeps failing and failing and failing and failing. Oh, it must be time to go home. Right?
You're doing, I think I spent, a while doing 50, 60, almost 70-hour weeks. And you just, by the end of that, you don't function correctly, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Waking up at 3 a.m. to work and then going nuts until 5, 6 dinner time. Not only do the things you do early in the morning and at the end of the day look like absolute hot garbage, but the diminishing returns, like the psychological impacts of that, are also not the healthiest thing in the world too. So I think just asking people, hey, try harder, work harder, do more hours. Overtime. The worst thing I want to hear is overtime is approved, right?
No, unlimited overtime is approved.
Yeah,
that's the worst.
That's one of the worst things, because it's not just approved. It implies that it's expected.
Right.
And if overtime is expected, then we probably screwed up in planning somewhere.
Well, and then there's there's so many factors. I had a fixed bid project and did 12 weeks of work in 10 weeks, 12 weeks of hours in 10 weeks over the holidays.
Right.
And I was getting up at 4 a.m. for meetings because, the rest of the group was in. It was such a challenge with that scenario, the logistics of it. And then all our meetings were in the first half of the day. So by the time I'm done with all the meetings and all of that, then I have to do the work. And it was a disadvantage because I'm way better, 10 a.m. than I am at, 1 p.m. You get this sweet spot of this is when I want to solve problems. This is when, this is my best time to do it.
Is that the biorhythms of your day
something
kind
like
of thing.
That. Yeah. Some
Kyle's
people
cycle.
circadian rhythm. Is that?
But yeah, what would you say as far as hours put in per week? How many hours a week do you hit before the hours above and beyond that become useless? Like the diminishing returns thing after, I think for me, it's probably 50, right? Like I can do,
Let me ask
6
this question. Does that number change as you get older, do you think?
Yeah,
yeah.
Yes. And I don't know about the correlation between getting older. There's probably something there, but I would just say, I mean, there's just days where your head's just not in the game, right? I mean, this is a thing, not just with software, it could be football or whatever, like get your head in the game. There's days where you're just not in the frame of mind that's conducive to doing software development. And I don't know what you can do about that. I mean,
taking us back to the baseball metaphor, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you just need to walk away from a problem and come back to it. You can labor on something for hours and bang your head against the wall, which is a common phrase among developers, and get nowhere. You might go to sleep, wake up the next morning, and be like, oh, I know what I have to do. And it's a 5-minute change that just you weren't in the right frame of mind to like come to that realization previously.
I have a little problem-solving elf that lives in my head, and I wake up with solutions.
It happens a lot, and I do that too. Or I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll be like, oh, it's simple, and I made it so complicated.
Yeah. Back to your point, Chad. I think 50 hours is a nice continual. You can ramp it up to 70, but not very long.
There's fatigue factors too.
Very long, right? Like I think. Well, and to answer your previous question too, I think age does impact it it did, at least it did for me, right? Like when I was younger, I was working, ridiculous hours just to get up to speed to where I am kind of now, right? Like build your skill set, you build, you learn all sorts of different frameworks and technologies and blah, 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 blah. And so when I was younger, and this ties in perfectly with the topic, right? Putting me in a role where like, hey, you have to implement this thing. Well, first of all, I have to figure out what's a message queue, right? Like at one point we all learned the first time, I heard Dan talking about this last time on the phone or yesterday on the phone. What's a dead letter queue? How do we listen to the dead letter queue? How do we do this with, all of those things? And then you actually get to solve the problem. And now as you progress through your career and age, now I'm just like, now that I don't need to learn all that stuff, you just take on a larger workload, like theoretically, and you're still working the same hours. You're just not spending every single minute learning and developing. It's a hamster wheel that it's hard to jump off of. Is that the right analogy, the hamster wheel?
Yeah, well, you're talking about you've built up context. You have an understanding of the context in which you're operating. So rather than going and reading a bunch of stuff to figure out like what does it mean to read from a dead letter queue, you have that context. It's like an index on a database. You can just go, oh, I know what that means. I don't have to read like 50 paragraphs of information and do a bunch of little side projects to really get an understanding of it. It's just available.
You actually need the index or not, right?
Yeah.
My effective hours fluctuate based on like how much interruptions I've had. If I have heads down, like time just to do work, I can get to that 50 range. If it's a hectic day, I'm good for like 36 or 30 hours where I'm effective.
Takes its toll for sure.
Isn't there a European country that mandated that they have the 32-hour week now? Is that Denmark?
France? I thought that was France.
It might.
Hey, go shut up and eat your freedom fries, Chad.
It might be France. I don't know. But I thought there was an entire nation that said it's not 40 hours anymore, it's 32. And they did studies and everybody was just as productive at 32 than they were at 40.
Right.
I think that would be, probably a horrible idea for a consulting company that bills hourly, a phenomenal idea for a nation that seems to be focusing more and more these days on mental health.
And they weren't changing salaries for those 32 hours, is my understanding, right? No. So for the consulting companies, you just divide by 32 instead of by 40, and for your weekly rate or whatever. But
well, it's about results and effectiveness and the output of it, and maybe it's less time spent, but maybe the time you do spend is going to be higher quality time.
Right, and there's been some interesting like data coming out of Japan, who is famous for having kind of a work workaholic culture. And if like you grew up in the 70s when I did, like Japan kind of shocked the US by sort of taking over the electronics economy and beating us at our own game. But it came at a huge social cost. People were being worked to death. They have an incidence of heart disease and suicide that's like probably related to overwork. And so,
yeah.
They literally fall on their sword sometimes. And I think they willingly do it. And they're like, you know what? This is better than another day.
You're working yourself to death, literally. And getting people into a space where they're the most effective, they have to have their needs met. Like you can't focus on your work if you're exhausted, if you're tired, hungry, and stressed out, and people breathing down your neck, and that just makes you worse and worse and worse. It's like we're all trying to get this thing done. We're trying to get the most out of this person, and we're crushing them. I heard a phrase, never ask somebody to be creative in a hurry. It's like you can't stress someone out and then ask them to be creative. You can't put somebody in a really stressful situation and ask them to be more effective. There's some point with carrot and stick. There's a sweet spot.
I don't even think the stick matters at a certain age anymore.
Yeah.
Like we see a stick and we're like, that's cute.
I've been beaten up enough. Like, nice. Who cares? Like,
yeah. And even the carrots aren't necessarily there for us anymore, right? Like it all comes back down to like, and we're going way off topic, but how do you motivate people after a certain point, right? Like when I was younger, those techniques kind of worked quite a bit, right? Especially the carrots. I really needed money. I had two kids and I was saving up to adopt a third. So every scrap, every cent, those carrots mattered. And then
I think
you get to be Peter, Dan, and I's age, maybe Kyle, you're our age too. Threats and warnings and all this stuff. Like, no thanks, right? Like the whole, I need to see you in my office. I don't think so. I'm busy.
Right? All right, I'll go in your office, take a picture, send it to you.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'll take a picture of myself. I'll send you a framed picture of myself. Then you can see me in your office all you want. There it is.
I'm inspired by people that are in it and like doing whatever they can. They're examples, being effective, caring, supportive, serving each other, propping each other up, a real that is has a mission to build something great. And then I want to be part of that. One of the best things that happened to me in terms of quitting smoking was working with a whole bunch of people that didn't smoke and being that I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be the guy that stinks, the guy that goes outside every hour for 10 minutes. Like it was motivating. And I think we have this need to fit in and belong and to be part of something, and providing people that opportunity, recognition, autonomy is usually near the top of the list for things that keep people, retention. And there's a diminishing return on, I guess, trying to motivate people. It's like, be the person you want other people to be instead of bribing and cajoling, whatever you call it, carrot and stick.
Yeah, and I think again, to your point, Chad, I think as you have more life experience under your belt, I'm going to use that term instead of aging. You just kind of understand that a lot of the stuff that you were really working so hard for doesn't really matter very much. Like you can't take the money with you as long as you have enough to be reasonably comfortable. Like unless you want a $75,000 guitar. Like, what do you need all that extra money for? And you're more interested in quality of life, work-life balance, which I think is becoming more and more common with the younger generation too, demanding more work-life balance.
Right.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Because maybe people are just waking up more to the kind of senselessness of a workaholic society.
Well, by the way, if you want to buy that guitar, Dan, it's $75,000.
I'll give you 50. I'm not a penny more.
I've been collecting a handful of articles to share in May. May is, I think, I think it's May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I've been collecting a handful of things to say and to share, and one of them is exactly what you're saying, Dan. Like people realizing, this was written by one fella, founder of a startup that just realized, like, why, right? Like the work is going to be there, and if I work a little bit harder, I'm still going to have, the more work is the reward for finishing a unit of work, and so it's I think, oh yeah, right, I think a lot more people are starting to realize that it's just a wheel, right? Like there's no end to it, and there's no real, I mean, there is kind of benefits to it, right? Like we get little, we get things if we bill extra hours, but those things aren't really aren't motivating me anymore. Right. And, like I don't think, like all of us, like I don't need a fancy car, right? Like I'm very happy with my 10-year-old pickup truck.
Yeah.
My wife is very happy with her 9-year-old SUV. Like we're not out there buying new cars every year. My house is just fine. Everything's fine. I don't need more money at this point. I won't turn down more money.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you do. I think there should be a workshop on motivating folks like us. Like, what is really driving us?
Well, and part of it is self-motivation, right? Like the desire to do a good job, to create working software. I mean, it's
to take pride in what you're doing.
There is an aspect to that, yeah, and to be recognized for doing that, right? Like being recognized as one of the individuals that can produce not just working software, but working maintainable software is working. Yes, maintainable, just as important in my world now, right? Because
more important.
Yeah,
almost more important. If I can't understand what some kid wrote, I mean, boy, I would rage when this is a Java thing, and I'm sure it applies to C# and other languages. Java came out with their streams, right? Where like instead of just iterating over a list, now you can do this whole chain of dot, collect and then dot blah blah blah. And I was like, oh Jesus, God, that looks horrible. It's unmaintainable. It's a mess. It's hard to debug. Don't do it. Now I use it all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you put 40 of them in a row, then you win a prize, I think.
Yeah, you look really, I mean, it looks really cool to nobody.
The stressing, laboring, like over things, like, the next day is the next batch of work. It's never going to end. What's the goal is like at some point, my job is just going to be to sit here and do nothing because I finished. And now I get to coast. Like, no. But I got talked to recently, and said, you need to read this book. It's called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, because it's all small stuff. Because I was, kind of burned out and like things were getting to me. And it's like, dude, you need to, stop stressing over this stuff. Like, this is always going to be here. One of the things in that, like, one of the first things was talking about the misconception that somebody that's not stressed out, running around, pulling their hair out, can't be productive. Those people that are just chill at work and, it's like, do they have anything to do? Are they like, well, yeah, they're just not stressing over everything and they can be just as effective. So it's like, well, what's the benefit then of, then you're, and that's a diminishing return. You're hurting yourself and you're making yourself less effective. And then, so there's a diminishing return to giving an crap.
Yeah. If I can put on my science hat for just a second, I think worry is an evolutionary response to, we have the capacity to think about the future, which not most creatures don't have the mental capacity that we do to think about the future. So worry is kind of an outgrowth of that understanding that we have that there probably will be a future that we need to participate in. And that's true. Want to try to sort of optimize that future for myself, which is a rational thing that's, come down to from an evolutionary perspective. But when you blow it out of proportion and give it more credence than it deserves, then it turns malignant and toxic, and it can poison your presence, which is kind of the only opportunity we have to actually do anything is in the present. And when you're spending the entire present moment obsessing about a future that may or may not happen, that's when it becomes toxic, and that's what we want to avoid.
It feels
so you want to have a little bit of worry.
Feels like on this podcast we've been talking more and more about toxicity, stress, and
we can retitle it, can't we?
Well, there's a diminishing return on on being in that mode, caring, trying to be a hero, and having a mission. And
book your Airbnb, save up the money, and then roll the dice. Yeah, maybe you'll get hit by a bus on your trip. I don't know, but you're not going to be able to worry that possibility out of existence.
But you can do things to control that, not drive down the wrong side of the highway.
Yeah, you can stack the odds in your favor.
Right.
So this does tie back because it's like the diminishing return of workload and hours spent and effectiveness and all of that stuff. There's also the team part, adding people to the team that Chad talked about. It's kind of all tied together. There's what are you doing that is going to be a benefit, and kind of finding that balance.
Yeah, the real challenge is to recognize when you're at the point of diminishing returns.
Yeah, good point.
It's not the fact that it exists. We all know it exists. And if you stay up for I don't know how many hours in a row, you will die, right? It's a scientifically proven thing that people need sleep for whatever reason. There's also that developer in us that very positively, I'm going to solve this problem in the next 5 minutes. And when that doesn't happen, I'm still going to solve this problem. It's really small. Just 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. We're all like 2-year-olds sometimes. We just need 5 more minutes 100 times in a row. And now it's 500 minutes. And so you put it aside. You go to bed, you wake up, the elf has solved the problem for you, and you really did only need the 5 minutes, but you needed a different 5 minutes than the ones you
Well, and then the leadership side, people, and kind of forcing a promise out of them. There's the,
how long is this going to take?
Yeah. When are you going to get this done?
How much more time do you need? I'll go fight for that.
I don't know. I can't see
usually do the opposite, right? Like if we need something done fast, right? Ideally, you're not always asking those questions, right? You've learned to expect exactly what each given developer's output is going to be. I'm talking about developers mostly, but
Yep.
You understand what their velocity is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, if I do ask somebody, or if I do say, hey, this is kind of a big deal, or this is a priority, the fact that we're not asking that literally every single sprint, or even every other sprint or whatever, right? Like they realize, inevitably, folks just come to understand, yes, okay, if he's asking and he never asks. And I'm the same way with other folks too. Like if one guy is constantly making every single thing an emergency, well, nothing's an emergency then, right?
Right.
He's just bad at his job. But conversely, like if somebody asks me that never asks for anything for anything, right? Then that one person, their one thing becomes a priority. So that's. If you talk about how to manage diminishing returns in leadership roles, don't make everything an emergency.
And it's hard for, because we're so bombastic, it's like calling people rock stars. That was super awesome. This is the greatest thing ever. And then on the bad side, this is a dire situation. This is we go to these extremes and we take people there. And it's like, well, is anybody going to die if this gets done tomorrow? Is the company going down? Is the world going to collapse? This can wait.
Yeah, I think
always going to be more work.
Yeah, and I think software is a unique field, I think, in some ways, because I think there's an information asymmetry between the people that are doing this, the nuts and bolts of the software, and the people that are asking for it, right? Because it's not like you can go to a production assembly line and troubleshoot like things that are wasting time or whatever and streamline the process. It's easy for an executive to say, hey, we need to deliver this by such and such a date because we've got a shareholders meeting or whatever. The people that have to deal with the complexities of that stuff, a lot of those which are unknown when you start the project in the first place, those complexities are hard to communicate to people that are kind of operating at a higher level of abstraction than you are. And so I think, if leadership can, and a lot of good leaders do recognize that this is a fact of software development, and just give people the freedom to say, hey, I know I'm supposed to have this done by the end of the sprint. I'm banging my head against the wall, and just given freedom for, so not everything's just tied to this kind of rigid sort of production schedule. I think software's just different in some ways. And that's I'm not trying to do a big cop out or say I'm special and I deserve special treatment. This is just an observation I've made with 20 years in this business.
Well, there's a lot of like context within an organization that you're walking into that you don't understand. And what I would do, because I was on a ton of solo projects, and I would find a person to be my translator for understanding leadership. They're good at communicating up. They understand the organization. They have the experience. They got a good relationship. So it's like training wheels until I can get up to speed. Somebody to ask those questions to. I always tried to find that person that could kind of fill that knowledge gap for me so that I could kind of level set with them on expectations and things like that.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to do, right? Because somebody's communication style might be all caps and screaming and yelling and where that's uncomfortable for most
I always
of us.
want to use 5 exclamation points. It's like, settle down. I tell that to myself. All right. At the end of a sentence, I'm like, okay, settle down.
No, it's really important that they understand the urgency with which I'm saying this phrase in my message. And yeah, it's tough. It's a challenge to come away from that. And I mean, exclamation points are a very good example of diminishing returns, right? Use one, it's important.
The first one is the most important one.
Yeah, but if you use 10, really, is it 10 times more important? No.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Yeah, I like that.
I feel like we should. I don't want to end now, but man, that was awesome, Peter.
Yeah.
Peter for the win. Yeah.
We are wasting exclamation points, people.
That's right, you guys.
Yeah, we've gone to a font now in our company that doesn't have an exclamation point. You hit that on your keyboard and it's just a period.
All right, let's take 10 minutes and let's try to solve this problem, especially in development, especially for ourselves. What do we do to fix it? What do we do to recognize it? So we've talked about recognizing it. How do we stop? How do you say no?
There's an old adage, which everybody knows, but it's don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think just taking that to heart, that like there's no such thing as perfect software. So if there's like a 1/100th of 1% chance that something's going to happen, maybe don't spend a week trying to account for that eventuality. They may never come to pass. Maybe it will. Maybe it's okay to just deal with it if and when it ever happens. So kind of just understanding that it's okay for things not to be perfect in software.
There's so many dimensions to this because you've got the adding people to a team, that difficulty, the diminishing return there, adding worry and stress, building this stuff up in your head to be too important and stressing over that, your sense of urgency is too high. The diminishing return of adding time to your day on yourself and others, the diminishing return of putting pressure on people. It's just the awareness of that's happening, and you need to understand that there's a point where you got to back off and go, okay, this is all we're going to get out of this maneuver. So let's just keep it here. Let's keep the hours under 50. Let's not make people promise things and put that on them. Let's not ask creative people to hurry.
And there's some built-in ways of dealing with this in Agile too. We do tech stories a lot on my team where it's like we know we need to do something, but we're not sure what. So we'll assign somebody a tech story /spike. I'm still not sure what the difference is. We have them both, but we don't point them with the conventional pointing system that Agile teams use. We time box them. And so we'll assign it to somebody. We'll say, spend 3 days, come back and tell us what you've learned. And that's kind of just a tacit acknowledgement that, we don't want this thing to run on forever. Let's invest 3 days and see what we can get with 3 days worth of effort and just be happy with that and make a decision at that point. It won't be a perfect decision.
That's a really good thing to identify, is that time boxing, or whatever we want to call it, limiting the amount of time that you're going to spend going down the rabbit hole. If you can say, I will go down this rabbit hole as fast as I can for 2 days at most, and then I will stop.
Yeah.
And I will either have found the solution or I won't. And sometimes the answer is, I still don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long it's going to take me to find the answer. So I think we need to ignore this one for now and move on.
But it would be so cool if I could do that, if I could make this so easy. If all they had to do was this.
Well, and there's a class of mathematical problems that are, well, like NP completeness and all this computer science jargon. There's a class of problems for which there is no known optimal solution. Right. So then you can say, okay, we're not going to we want it to be optimal, but it's not possible. So we got to go for good enough.
So if they come in and ask you for the optimal solution to the traveling salesman problem, you say, I think that's been proven not to exist.
Yeah, we can get you almost there, but it's going to cost you $1 billion.
If you're at the end of your project and you're close to the finish line, but it's still too far away, don't add anybody because it's not going to make you get there any faster, right?
I mean, I would say 3/4 of the way through a project, you're not going to get anything out of adding more bodies.
Because you've got a lot more to learn than you did at the start, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of what you learn is all the stuff that didn't work, right? So somebody, I have this problem with retros too, and you're supposed to like, hey, maybe somebody new has a new idea. Well, if they had all the context that we had, we did all the new ideas over the last 3 years. It's part of the diminishing returns of bringing more people on is you've got to explain all the lessons learned over the last few years. You got to shoot down ideas. You got to hurt feelings. You got to do all sorts of stuff. And then at the end of the day, adding 10 people to a 20-person team really just drains everybody's time and decreases the quality of the delivered product. So,
right.
Is there a rate then? Is there an effective rate at which you should add people? Like 10 at once is bad, but if you did one every 2 weeks.
If you trickled them in, that's a great idea, but at the same time, it's still the same thing, right? Like when you're doing discovery, that's when, when guys like Dan, Peter, and me, when we figure out like, okay, this is probably what the team size is going to be. Right. And then as scope increases, as it always does, so does maybe the team size, right? If we've got more scope, then yes, maybe adding a couple of people here or there will help address said scope that we weren't aware of, right? But once the scope is defined, once the size of the project is defined, and we've broken every single problem down to its most workable chunk, you just have to trust us sometimes that more people are not going to help solve this problem any faster.
Because if the argument is that more people will make it go faster, then why not add 1,000 people to the project, right? Then you'll be done tomorrow.
Yeah, there's all sorts
Wouldn't
of
that be great?
You could do, right? Where you're like, all right, let's start with 1,000. Well, that's crazy. All right, well, then let's go down to 2. Well, that's also crazy. So.
Anything else to help keep from getting into the rabbit hole of diminishing returns and staying there?
I think Kyle mentioned awareness. I think as a developer, the whole rabbit hole thing, all of us who've ever developed, you've know about this phenomenon and going down a rabbit hole. And at some point you can just wake up and it's like, where the hell am I and how did I get here? And what was I trying to do? So I think just checking in, like trying to maintain some level of awareness, maybe check in, say, hey, maybe I just step away from this for a day or something and let my mind clear and come back at it. Because maybe I'm wasting a lot of time on trivial details that don't really matter to the big picture.
Well, and there also can be a point where you need to ask for help. It's like, okay.
Yeah, or ask for help. Yeah.
If I could spend another 2 hours trying to figure out these Excel formulas, or I could shoot Peter a message on Skype back in 2012 and say, hey, how do I do this formula? And then 2 minutes later, he kicks it back, and I'm good to go. Thanks, Peter. I didn't thank you for that. Yeah,
I think you've thanked me before.
Any more parting thoughts? We're getting down to the wire. 4 minutes left.
I'm still going to go with it. More exclamation points, diminishing returns. Think of it that way. That's the answer.
If this podcast drags on too much longer, we're going to start to see the law of diminishing returns in action.
Yeah, people are going to start
exclamation points. I'm just going to think about that, ponder on it for a while.
That's profound.
It is such a great example.
All right. That's the podcast nugget.
All right. We better go. Say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.